Have you ever stopped to think about what would happen if human evolution had never occurred? What would the world be like today without great inventions, complex societies, and perhaps even our very consciousness? In a scenario where our cognitive evolution hadn't taken the stride it has, our lives, our interactions with the planet, and even our very identities would be completely different. Want to discover what a world without our evolution would be like? Then keep reading and explore the possibilities of an alternative future, where humans are just another animal on a wild planet. Cognitive evolution was undoubtedly key to our rise as a dominant species. Without the ability to develop abstract thought, collective memory, and self-awareness, humanity would not have been able to create the complex cultures and societies we know today. Imagine, for example, a world where communication was limited to the simple exchange of gestures or sounds without any symbolic meaning. Modern technology as we know it would not have emerged, and civilization would be an impossible utopia, where daily survival would be limited to the satisfaction of basic needs. Over thousands of years, cognitive evolution enabled the creation of more sophisticated tools, the construction of durable shelters, and eventually the invention of something so simple yet so complex: language. The symbolic communication we use to express our thoughts, feelings, and ideas not only facilitated survival, but also allowed entire cultures to unite and share memories. Without it, we would be isolated beings, disconnected from each other, without a true understanding of what it means to be human. However, we cannot forget that our ability to reflect on life and question the world around us also stems from cognitive evolution. Consciousness, the knowledge that we exist and are part of something greater, is what allowed us to develop spirituality and the first notions of morality. While cognitive evolution brought us technology and civilization, it also created a new dilemma: the awareness that the environmental impact of our development needs to be reflected upon, since our creative capacity also imposes responsibilities on us. Imagine what our lives would be like without the mastery of fire. We wouldn't have the ability to cook food, which would directly affect our nutrition and the energy needed for brain development. The domestication of fire not only brought warmth and light on dark nights, but also fueled human evolution, giving us a chance to explore new territories, such as colder areas where other species can't survive. Without it, our journey toward civilization would have been more limited, confining us to regions where survival didn't require constant adaptation. Without fire, the tools we use daily, from building shelters to making utensils, would also be impossible. Imagine a world without metal, without the ability to transform raw materials into something useful and sophisticated. Furthermore, the absence of fire would make it difficult to maintain communities. Providing heat for cooking, warming our bodies, or even heating the environment in harsh climates would be a daily challenge. Fire was undoubtedly one of the first technologies that enabled the formation of more complex and connected societies. The impact of not having mastered fire would also have changed our interaction with nature and other animals. Without the protection of fire, we would be more vulnerable to predators, further limiting our survival. At the same time, the domestication of fire gave us the possibility of creating something more space for reflection and leisure. Around a campfire, early humans began to share stories, create myths, and establish the first forms of symbolic communication. This would form the basis of our collective memory and the preservation of cultures, an essential element for civilization. Technology as we know it would not be possible without symbolic language. After all, without the ability to communicate abstract thoughts and complex ideas, how could we transmit the knowledge necessary to create sophisticated tools and machines? Language, besides enabling the exchange of experiences and the sharing of learning, is the foundation of all innovation. Without it, each generation would have to rediscover the same knowledge, which would hinder the continuous progress that characterizes our civilization. One of the keys to technological development lies in our ability to design, plan, and pass on information. For example, without language, it would be impossible to create instruction manuals, teach complex physics concepts, or even develop algorithms that govern modern programming. The invention of writing, combined with the development of a complex language, enabled the recording of human knowledge, essential to construction of modern societies. Imagine a world where all technology had to be taught only by demonstration, with no possibility of recording or detailed explanation. Furthermore, language symbolizes how we perceive the world. Through it, we share not only technical information but also philosophical ideas, dreams, and visions of the future. Without this capacity, technology could be nothing more than a basic tool, lacking a long-term vision or a deeper purpose. The creation of technologies such as electricity, the internet, and space travel was only possible because we were able to think and communicate these concepts in increasingly complex ways, building on the knowledge accumulated over centuries. If agriculture and livestock farming had not been developed, the human landscape would be very different from what we know today. Without these two fundamental pillars, human life would continue to depend on hunting and gathering, drastically limiting the amount of food available. Instead of being able to settle in a single place and form lasting communities, humans would have had to continue moving from place to place, like nomads, always in search of food. Agriculture, with its seeds, crops, and cultivation techniques, is what allowed humans to transform land into a constant and controlled resource. Furthermore, the domestication of animals for livestock production provided not only food, but also labor to plow the land, transport loads, and aid survival. Without these practices, not only would the human diet be more restricted, but the construction of complex cities and empires, such as those of Mesopotamia and Egypt, would be impossible. Food, transportation, and storage would also be constant challenges, limiting the possibilities for trade and exchange of resources between different groups. Thus, human life would remain fragmented without the possibility of building the great civilizations we know today. Without agriculture, the impact on the environment would also be different. The expansion of agricultural land, with the construction of large cities, and increased food production shaped the Earth's landscape in profound ways. Without it, nature would have maintained more of its wildness. Ecological balance would have been preserved for longer, but on the other hand, humans would be more vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change. The stability that agriculture provided to human society, creating food surpluses and enabling population growth, would be but a distant dream in a world without these practices. Without history or collective memory, the human experience would be profoundly fragmented. The lack of a writing system and the inability to transmit knowledge from generation to generation would impede the construction of traditions and cultures. Collective memory is what allows us to learn from the past, share experiences, and build our identity as a species. Without it, each generation would start from scratch, without access to previous learnings. Imagine a world where the achievements of our ancestors were lost to time, as if they had never existed. Without a symbolic language to record events or teach values, human experiences would be purely individual. Each person would live in isolation, without a shared understanding of society, morality, or collective goals. The transmission of knowledge would be limited to personal and practical experiences, which would hinder any kind of collective advancement. Instead of a continuous process of cultural evolution, we would simply be a collection of human beings trying to survive, never achieving a sense of collective purpose. The loss of history and collective memory would also profoundly affect our ability to understand the world around us. There would be no way to build a shared vision of the cosmos, the stars, or the Earth itself. The myths and narratives that connect us and help us make sense of life would be non-existent. In such a world, religion and spirituality might not have emerged in the same way, as a need for symbolic and cultural explanations would have been replaced by the simple pursuit of survival. If humanity had never evolved or significantly impacted the planet, Earth would be very different from what we know today. Without human intervention, natural ecosystems would have continued their course without the impacts of urbanization, industry, and agriculture. Forests, for example, would have expanded even further, and many species now facing extinction would have thrived, while global biodiversity would have continued to develop organically, without the pressures caused by human activity. However, the absence of humanity would also result in a planet without the infrastructure that defines modern life. There would be no cities, roads, or airplanes flying through the sky. Earth's climate would be influenced by natural factors, such as solar variations and weather cycles. But without greenhouse gas emissions caused by the burning of fossil fuels, global warming would not have the same impact we experience today. Nature would have a greater chance of self-regeneration, with landscape erosion and climate change occurring more gradually. Although the Earth regenerates from many of our actions, The absence of a species aware of its environmental impact would leave the planet in a natural balance, but without the solutions we have created for environmental problems. In other words, the future of the planet without human action would be a paradox, a healthier and more balanced world in some respects, but without the possibilities for preservation and recovery afforded by our technology and innovation. The cycle of extinctions and rebirth of life will continue without human intervention, but also without our ability to mitigate the damage and support the biodiversity that Earth harbors. Without art, culture, and spirituality, the world will be much drier and shallower. These three areas are not just forms of expression, but represent the core of what it means to be human. Art connects us with our feelings, experiences, and the world around us, offering a way to represent the ineffable, that which cannot be expressed in words. Culture, in turn, is a common thread that connects generations, transmitting values, beliefs, and behaviors, creating a collective identity that unites us as a society. And spirituality, in its various forms, raises questions about existence, purpose, and the universe. Without art, there would be no cave paintings to tell us about early humans. Without the ability to create symbols, to interpret the world subjectively, humanity would have lost the chance to develop the first forms of complex communication. The world would be a place without the great works that inspire generations, such as the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper. Without culture, traditions would be non-existent, and civilizations would develop in a disorderly fashion, lacking the cohesion that music, dance, and cultural celebrations provide. Human life would be largely monotonous and devoid of nuance. A lack of spirituality would also have a profound impact. While many religious traditions could be seen as explanations for the unknown, they also have the power to unite people around causes greater than themselves. Spirituality offers us a sense of belonging and purpose, something science cannot provide. Without this search for the transcendent, human life would have become merely a material existence, without greater meaning or purpose. The absence of these deeper dimensions of human experience would leave us with a less rich life, more focused solely on survival, without questioning or exploring what lies beyond. In a world without cognitive evolution, human life will be governed almost exclusively by instinct and biological needs. Without the ability to think abstractly, reflect on the future, or formulate plans, humans would act solely on basic survival impulses: hunger, thirst, fear, and reproduction. Every action would be an immediate reaction to environmental stimuli, without any notion of long-term consequences. The development of culture and civilization would have been impossible, since collective memory and symbolic communication, fundamental to learning and cooperation, would not exist. Survival in such a world would depend on humans' ability to instinctively adapt to natural challenges. Hunting and gathering would be the primary means of subsistence, with groups of humans acting in a coordinated manner, but without any more complex organization. Cooperation, while necessary, would be limited to immediate practical actions, such as hunting together or protecting oneself from predators. However, without the cognitive capacity to construct strategies, humans would be vulnerable to environmental threats and competition with other species, which might be better adapted to living in the wild. The impact of this instinctive world would also have a profound impact on interpersonal relationships and social structure. Without consciousness and reasoning, there would be no complexity in human relationships, which would be based solely on immediate survival. The idea of family, tribe, or community as we know it would not exist in the way we understand it today. Instead, groups would be more transient, composed of individuals focused exclusively on biological needs, and without a greater understanding of identity or collective purpose. Instinct would reign, but there would be no evolution towards something more complex or meaningful. In a world without evolved humans, the planet's fauna and ecosystems would develop very differently. The absence of our activities, such as urbanization, agriculture, and the destruction of natural habitats, would create space for the proliferation of species that otherwise face the threat of extinction. Animals like elephants, tigers, and wolves, which currently struggle with territorial loss, would have larger ecosystems to inhabit and thrive. Nature, in its essence, would regenerate, creating a balance between different species, where the food chain and relationships between living beings would evolve without human interference. Furthermore, the absence of humans means that domesticated species like dogs, cats, and other farm animals would likely no longer exist. The process of domestication and breeding of these species was a significant milestone in the relationship between humans and animals. But without our intervention, these animals would likely continue to live in the wild like their wild relatives. The role of animals in the ecosystem would be completely different. For example, wolves would continue to be apex predators, controlling populations of deer and other herbivores, while birds of prey would continue to play a role in controlling rodents. However, it would also be possible for some species, without human presence, to expand uncontrollably, altering the ecological balance in unexpected ways. The lack of control over animal populations could result in overpopulation of certain species, which would generate new dynamics in ecosystems. Thus, while a world without humans would likely be more balanced, it would also pose its own challenges, with nature developing alternative forms of adaptation and regulation among species, without the interference of our cognitive and technological evolution. Living without consciousness would be a profoundly challenging concept, as the very idea of existence would be devoid of reflection or self-understanding. Without the ability to question the why of life or our own existence, we would be like any other living being, moving by instinct, never stopping to ponder the purpose of our journey. Consciousness allows us to look at the world, at others, and at ourselves and question. Without it, our life experience would be limited to the immediate, lacking a depth of understanding or a critical eye for our surroundings. In philosophy, consciousness is often associated with the ability to reflect on the universe and our own existence. Without this awakening, human life will become a constant stream of meaningless experiences, without the ability to learn from the past or project the future. The search for the meaning of life, one of the greatest concerns of philosophy and spirituality, would be non-existent. In a world without consciousness, humans would simply be a species existing for the sake of existing, without the need or desire to understand more about what life, the universe, or being itself is. However, even without cognitive evolution, the idea of existing could still have a dimension. We would simply be living more instinctively, but this does not mean that life will be devoid of value. Human nature itself, even without cognitive complexities, would have its own type of existence, adapted to the environment and without the need to philosophize about it. But without consciousness, there will be no attempt to transcend the everyday or to explore the profound questions that make us human. We would be just another piece in nature's grand game, never questioning our role in it. Now that you've explored the possibilities of a world without human evolution, it's clear how much our cognitive and cultural journey has shaped the planet and our existence. But what if we can still learn something from these reflections? How would you apply the teachings of this alternative vision of humanity to your life today? Be sure to reflect on the impact of our choices on the future. If you enjoyed this unique perspective and want more content that challenges your way of thinking, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Let's continue this journey of reflection together.